Hello, welcome to China Daily Studio. Thursday this week will mark the 3rd anniversary of the Sichuan earthquake. Today we are having Eric Nilsson, a China Daily reporter, who has made 10 journeys to the quake zone to share his experience in Sichuan. Hello, Eric.
Hello.
When was the last time you went to Sichuan, and when was the first time?
The first time that I went to Sichuan was about 6 months after the disaster first took place, and the last of the 10 trips took place during Tomb Sweeping Festival earlier last month.
So it's 10 times in 3 years, which roughly equals 3 times a year. What has made you go back so often?
The reason that I went in the first place was partly because I was actually supposed to be in the quake zone during the time that the quake took place, but I didn't end up going for several reasons, one of which is that I was married earlier that week and had my honeymoon, and I came back and found out about the quake. And I had always wondered what would have happened if I had been there. After I went there and really came to realize the scale of the devastation, just looking out the car window for days and days of tents and rubble, I came to realize that the reconstruction would require a sustained commitment from the world, from society, and particularly from the media. Other events were going to grab the headlines. It was obviously the news of the time in 2008, but I, at that point, came to believe that we needed to continue to follow through in the years to come and sustain a commitment to the quake zone to make a good recovery possible.
How long did you usually stay there each time?
On average, about 2 weeks each time.
So did you went to different places or the same place each time?
I've been to several dozen villages and towns in about a dozen cities.
So when you're thinking of your 10 visits, which one has given you the most unforgettable memory?
That's very difficult to say in terms of the visits, but there are certainly individual experiences that have been absolutely incredible and moving, and I think it's really difficult to select among those one that really stands out above the rest.
I bet that you must have tons of stories about that experience. And could you share 1 or 2 stories with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the change during the period has been absolutely incredible. And it's also been interesting to sometimes have the opportunity to return to places to see how their lives are improving. One of the more interesting experiences, I thought, was I had the opportunity to meet Hero Pig, or Strong Pig, who was a pig who was trapped in the rubble for 36 days after the earthquake. And he survived on charcoal and water, and he had lost a lot of weight. He had practically starved to death. After he had been rescued, by the time that I met him, he loved to eat so much. His keeper said he thought maybe every time he got to eat would be his last time. So he had become so obese he couldn't walk. They had to put him on a diet and take him out for regular exercise, put him on an exercise regimen. And when they released him from his pen so I could take photos of him, I couldn't even really get good photos of him because the entire time he had his snout buried in the grass, eating. Some of the stories, some of the times, I think particularly around 2009 and 10, during the grieving process, I believe perhaps a lot of people were kind of dealing with anger before the resolution. So there were some very surreal moments. I remember one moment in particular. I was out in a rural village that had been destroyed, and all around us is rubble. And she had picked some vegetables from the forest to eat that day. And she was talking with us about the death of her daughter. And, she was just screaming that she couldn't bear it. How could she get on with life? How could she live? These sorts of things, and the screams were just echoing off the mountains. A few years later, we had the opportunity to revisit her, and at that time, she was doing much better. and had come to realize, she said, that she still had 3 daughters and that their lives were very precious.
Another story, perhaps?
Yes. Another thing that I thought was interesting was a friend, Zhao Yangbo, who owns a tea house in Deyang, says that after the quake, people started buying pricier brews because the quake made them realize that they only live once, that life is precious, so they should enjoy it. Go ahead, buy the expensive tea, don't worry about it. And also realizing how fragile life was, they started to pay more attention to their health.
So we can see there's a change in people's mentality after the quake, right? So comparing the first visit with your latest one, what are the most noticeable change in the quake zone, do you think?
Oh, I think that there's been absolutely incredible transformation in the quake zone. It's unrecognizable from the time that I went there in 2008, and it was just days out the car window of tents and rubble, to a place where the houses are very large, modern, and spacious. And the same also goes for the schools, hospitals, the infrastructure. It's really incredible because, I'm from the United States. When I go to, for example, Hongbai Primary School, where I've done both reporting and some volunteer work, the school there is much nicer and has much better facilities than any school that I went to in the United States as a primary school student.
So how are the locals adapting to their new life now?
I would say that ultimately most people are very happy, and I think that they're very happy with the material improvements. The quake zone now not only looks better than it did immediately after the quake, but it also looks better than most of the countryside in China or any other developing country. The problem, if any, has been that China and no other country really could be equipped with the absolutely massive army of social workers that would be necessary to help people overcome the trauma that they dealt with. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people were traumatized, but they have found innovative ways to work around it. So, for example, at Hongbai School, the students are doing Taiji as a way to cope with the quake. And during this last trip, we spent the Tomb Sweeping Festival at a mass grave in Yingxiu, where about a third of the population of the town died. They had 6,000 bodies that they had to bury in a cornfield because they needed to reduce the risk of epidemic. And we talked to the keeper, and he said, for the first year, the place was full of crying people every day. And every year since, it's been fewer and fewer as people are starting to heal and starting to move on. And he says, by this year, really, it's the fewest people that he's seen there, and just not as many people are crying, and they're just not crying as hard at this point.
So we can see people are better off now, right?
Absolutely better. People are far, far better off, definitely. And, even right after the quake in 2008, we had the opportunity to visit the largest temporary housing complex in the quake zone in Dujiangyan. And at the gate, they had a sign by the police station with interchangeable numbers that said, "There has not been a crime committed here in 103 days. And when you looked in the windows of all of the temporary houses, everybody was playing mahjong.
That's a typical game in Sichuan. People love doing that.
Absolutely, absolutely. It was a very Sichuanese way of dealing with the disaster. And I have to say, the thing that I think in my personal life, the only thing I've seen with my 2 eyes that has been more incredible and more powerful than the seismic violence that was unleashed on Sichuan has been the resilience of the survivors and their absolute determination to hope for a better life.
As a foreign journalist, have you met difficulties when you were reporting from there?
There were many difficulties, some of which came with being a foreign journalist, some of which didn't. We were often stuck on a mountain because there was a landslide up ahead of us, and so sometimes you could spend a half a day waiting in a car for the construction workers to clear the landslides away. We also had to climb over mountains quite a bit, these sorts of things. As a foreign journalist, there were also some linguistic barriers because a lot of the people that we talk to do not speak Mandarin. They only speak
Sichuan dialect.
The Sichuan dialect. So while I didn't quite learn enough to be able to conduct interviews, I learned a little bit of Sichuan dialect, which I found really made the people more willing to speak to me. So, for example, to say, I'm a China daily journalist, I'm from the United States. In Mandarin, you'd say, 我是中国日报的记者，我从美国来的. But in the Sichuan 话, you would say, 我是美国的记者，我是中国日报的记者，我从美国来的.
So they're more willing to talk when hearing that.
Yes.
Yeah. You co-wrote and co-edited a China daily book on the quake zone. So tell us more about the book.
The book is called Unshakeable Sichuan, Chronicles of the Wenchuan Quake Zone. And it's a few hundred stories, some of the very best coverage from about 25 China daily journalists that have covered the quake zone from the time that the disaster struck until 2010. And what the book really does is it provides the individual stories of the rescue and recovery that altogether create a mosaic that provides a full picture so that a reader can really understand comprehensively the totality of what happened in Sichuan since the day of the disaster.
It's already published?
Yes, it's been published by China Intercontinental Press.
So are you planning more trips back to the quake zone in the near future?
I will continue to go to Sichuan, probably for the rest of my life.
Why?
I have many friends there. I've made many friends over my travels there, and I feel a very strong connection to the place and to the people.